Good afternoon. My name is Seafood Dave Charles with the KAJUKENBO Napoli here in Naples, Italy. There are a lot of false perceptions about self-defense and or martial arts and what it means to be a martial artist or a black belt instructor. To the novice, black belts are often seen as being experts and somehow elevated as an expert in self-defense and combating violence in our world. They're almost elevated to a superhero status and believed to be able to easily defeat the villains of our world. So with that said, what is martial arts? Well, let's talk about that, and let's talk about violence a little bit. So the Oxford Dictionary defines martial arts as a noun with the following definition: various sports in which originate chiefly in Japan, Korea, China, as forms of self-defense or attack, such as judo, karate, and kendo. Merriam-Webster's defines martial arts as any of several arts of combat and self-defense, such as karate and judo, that are widely practiced as a sport. Oddly, in various dictionaries, martial arts is clearly defined as a sport in the modern world. Now, in the world we live in today, the dictionary definition may be more accurate description, as we meet in sport to test ourselves against each other and to validate our skills as martial artists in a controlled setting that does not have life and death consequences. After all, it's not the norms that you hear of samurai or ninjas lurking in the shadows in today's world. Some would say that self-defense industry has attempted to spread fear and provided a man signal for modern martial arts to fill the gap and to provide a means for average citizens to defend themselves when confronted with violence in today's world. Now, while I would agree that the narrative certainly has some merit, it's not without statistical data, though, to back up that in today's society, there's still substantial risk that you may experience a violent crime in your lifetime. I would argue that martial arts can and often will be perceived as the study of violence, how to defend against being a victim of various forms of violence or affecting violence on others. Its use, however, is obviously intended to be used honorably in defense of oneself or the ones that we love. So with that in mind, and the fact that most martial arts instructors, while being perceived as experts in violence, thankfully in large part have not experienced violence to the extent of being able to critically look at what they've been taught and separate what works and what does not. So how do we condition ourselves to survive an attack, or how do we prepare ourselves aside from going out and looking for trouble? Well, we need to have a good discussion about violence. We need to strive to condition ourselves to face the realities of violence and understanding the mindset that will be necessary to survive, as well as the range of mental challenges that you will face as you step through the levels of force required in order to exit the other side of a life-changing event, both alive and not facing that charges yourself as a result of the actions you take in defending yourself. So with that said, obviously it's better to face a jury of your peers than to not take the required action, which may result in permanent injury or death of an attacker as a result of your efforts protecting your own life and that of your loved one. So when you're being attacked, you'll likely fall under one of the following categories. You may be surprised, scared, or caught off guard. Okay? Usually the attacker was prepared and you're being ambushed and you're unaware. That's the preferred state during a robbery. Okay? You may be alerted, okay, as you saw it coming due to your situational awareness, but you're unable to avoid or escape prior to being attacked. It could be natural for you. Okay? You might be comfortable with violence or responding to the aggression. Maybe you work as a police officer, security officer, or a bouncer. Okay, feels pretty natural when you're working in those settings. You could be the aggressor. Okay, you could be defending your loved ones, your home, or your property. And keep in mind that there are times where being the aggressor is an acceptable mode of operation. Okay, there are basic levels of force that you may need to apply, and you might want to consider those now. And those consist of, three basic categories, in my opinion. There's no injury, or your best effort to minimize injury. And that would be during training, or maybe you have a drunk or a friend or family member that you're trying not to hurt, or maybe you have a raging spouse or lover that has gotten a little bit out of hand. And obviously, you don't want to injure those folks. But then we move into the injuries where injury is acceptable. Okay, that's where you're in a physical altercation in a bar. Maybe you're being robbed or under sexual assault. Okay, which then would also segue into deadly force. Okay, where you have armed attackers, multiple attackers. You're in defense of yourself or others, and you fear for your life or their life. So obviously, those two are pretty closely related and can dip into one or the other very quickly. Okay, but it's extremely important to understand that these are just basic concepts. And you need to keep in mind that nothing is fixed, and these concepts, can be expanded to meet any situation. Okay, from basic self-defense perspective, this should be the minimum as a starting point to consider. So, what is self-defense? It's important to define what self-defense is. Okay, finding yourself in a bad situation, whether that's just due to pure bad luck or stupidity, or bad behavior on your part and not being able to recover from it. Ideally, we want to avoid or strive to avoid situations where we must use our martial arts skills to recover from a situation. But should that not be possible, we need to be prepared to react to situations unconsciously, not requiring thought. Now, this is accomplished by repetition and attempting to counter every conceivable situation through training over and over and over again until the response becomes unconscious and reaction to the situation as it presents itself. In KAJUKENBO, we use prearranged training sets that are called grab arts, punch counters, or tricks, stick attacks or for defending against a stick, club, or a baseball bat, knife attacks for knife defense, and gun counters for gun attack defense. Okay, these prearranged sets are what makes up the bulk of KAJUKENBO belt requirements or required knowledge for advancement in rank. Now, a common realization and argument that will be presented either by a student or by a casual observer is that surely an attacker will not simply remain compliant to your punch counter, your grab art, or your stick defense, knife defense, or gun defense technique as written or laid out move for move as we teach it to the student. With that said, in fact, believing that every move will work out in every situation against every opponent is in fact a mistake that could very well cost you your life. Everything is negotiable. That is to say that you must remain flexible as you execute response in real life versus training. You might say that we fight like we train and we train how we fight. Is that not so? Now, while that is certainly one of the concepts that we use, and we use scripted, or I dare I say, choreographed fight scenarios to learn various techniques that teach the student to use body dynamics and specific techniques to escape, block, strike, and control in every conceivable situation. However, it's very important to state that the entire technique as taught may not be executed in its entirety in real life. It may not be possible depending on the action or the reaction of your attacker. Now, with this concept in mind, it can be useful to approach every technique using a three-phase approach, classified for the beginner, intermediate, and advanced stages of training. So with that said, we'll start off with phase one, or the empty cup, okay, that we like to call shut up and train. Okay, this is where essentially the student is an empty cup, okay, that needs to be filled with knowledge. Okay, the student must trust that the techniques work and they've been time tested in the streets. Okay, we want to we want to stay away from the what if. We want to perform the techniques verbatim as they're taught. We want to pay specific attention to precise execution. This is the beginner phase. Okay, this is a new technique where you must learn the concepts before manipulating them. This builds confidence that with practice, the techniques will work when needed. Okay, now in this beginning phase, or phase one, the attacker works with the student, helping them to learn his body language, reacting to realistic strikes, being a good training partner. It's important to understanding those techniques and developing flow based off of realistic training and body dynamics. Okay, at this point, the attacker offers no resistance. Okay, then we move into phase two. This is the what if. Okay, this encourages the questioning attitude of the student. Okay, this is where we get into exploring the what if scenarios should an unforeseen variable present itself. Techniques are not verbatim, and they change as the situation does. This is the intermediate phase. This is where basic technique has already been mastered, and students learn to adapt to a changing situation, such as additional punches, additional kicks. The body doesn't react the way that he expected the body to react when he delivered his previous strike. And this is where some of the real learning, comes into play. At this point, the attacker is not compliant and offers resistance. He may add additional attacks or react in an unexpected fashion. Okay, the attacker may exploit pauses and or hesitation so that the student learns to develop violence of action or flow, to use the body position and angles to limit vulnerabilities. And lastly, we talk about phase 3. That's what. Okay, this is where the defender begins to orchestrate the attacker, ending the attack before it can effectively be executed. Uses principles of fighting to bait the attacker in a desired outcome in order to finish the attack. Now, obviously, this is an advanced phase and normally probably going to be involving your higher ranks. The student learns to manipulate the attacker through control, okay, learning to read body language to set the attacker up and undo the attack as the attack is unfolding. Okay, now with that said, let's talk about, it's very important. Essentially, I want to go ahead and mention this. It's just, just to stress that having favorite techniques or merely a few go-to techniques may not be sufficient for all situations. Okay, one must be flexible and explore every possible situation and preparation for the unknown situation. Okay, now let's talk about bad luck versus stupidity. Okay, bad luck is one thing. Okay, things happen, stuff happens. You may just find yourself in the wrong neighborhood, wrong bar, may bump into the wrong person, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, but stupidity is another thing. Some go looking around for a fight, and obviously, eventually, you're going to find one, no matter how big and intimidating you are. Okay. Aside from that, let's take a good look at how we can use situational awareness, to prevent the situation in the first place. Now, I know a lot of people think that situational awareness is a bunch of BS. Okay, but let me tell you, just paying attention to your surroundings and learning to read people can get you out of a jam before it starts and can help you mitigate the role that you play in a situation once it does cook off. And I would argue that if you're able to identify a threat and execute a strategy before the threat is able to attack you, would you not be executing the phase 3 technique as described previously? Okay, the threat ends before the attack is even executed. And that's self-defense at a much higher level. And maybe it all only plays out in your head, or maybe you just saved yourself a night in the ER or worse. Situational awareness is much harder to teach than how to react to a given scenario or a given, self-defense situation. Okay. Okay. The smallest of variables can make a huge difference in the outcome that you face. You miss a cue or you understand a gesture from a bystander, everything can change based off of your understanding. Okay, give you an example. I found myself in a bar in Ecuador when I was doing counter narcotics operations, and we were all out having a good time. There's a big group of us. We were all outside. There's a little patio area, and obviously we were drinking, dancing, having a good time. And nobody was actually paying attention to all the drinks that were on the table. I turn around, I look at the table, I grab my beer, and I go to take a sip of my beer. But I catch a glance from a bystander, okay, that was just outside of the railing that encloses this bar. So there's a bunch of vendors and everything just outside of this railing. They're trying to sell us things. And the guy looks at me and he shakes his head. And I see this and I'm like, what? I kind of look at him. And I look at my beer. And I look back at him and he gives me a nod. So I put the beer back on the table. And I get the waitress and said, hey, give me another round of drinks for everybody. Okay, so takes the old drinks away, brings a bunch of new drinks, and then I'm now paying attention. And I look at the same individual, and he's like, gives me a little thumbs up. Okay. So come to find out later on that this, a lot of people that were going to this bar got their drink spiked. Okay. And then they got rolled later on. Okay. So paying attention in this situation saved my ass, and everybody's ass that was at that table with me. Okay. So criminals are always looking for easy targets. Okay. They're not looking for a conflict, and they don't want to bring any attention to themselves. In fact, they want to draw the least amount of attention to themselves as possible. If you can make yourself a hard target, okay, that may be all it takes to get them to leave you alone and pick somebody else. Just the fact that if you're aware that they are there, that may be enough to deter an attack. Or you may be smart enough to make a decision that keeps that attack from happening, as in the example. Okay, I'll give you another example. I was getting off the San Diego trolley one night after working a shift as a bouncer. Okay, coming back and probably about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. So I'm heading back to the base, to go hit my, hit the bed and whatnot after a long day. And I get off the trolley and I make eye contact with somebody as I'm getting off the trolley from a good amount of distance, but I see the guy watching me, and I notice that he's watching me. And I start on my way towards the base. And lo and behold, this guy starts to follow me. Okay, so I make my way across the street, and I listen, and I can hear his footsteps behind me. I turn, I look, he's there. Keep going. He's following me. Look again, he's a little bit closer. Keep going. I turn around and I said, "Hey, what do you want?" Okay, guy startled, kind of looks at me like, "Oh." Okay, he crosses the street. Okay, but then he continues to follow me on the other side of the street. Okay, so we get to the end of this street, and there's like a railroad tracks, and I cut down the railroad tracks to a side gate that goes onto the base, and guy stops and just watches me. I'm like, okay, so he's watching me, I'm watching him, I'm alert, and I'm looking around for anybody else who might be hiding in the shadows, kind of thing. I have plenty of room and everything else. I'm looking around for any weapons I might be able to use, should something cook off. Okay, made it all the way to the gate, get on the base, and good to go. Okay, but the bottom line is, had I not been paying attention, that guy might have smacked me in the back of the head, knocked me out, took my wallet, and I would have gotten robbed and hurt and everything else. Okay, situational awareness once again. Okay. So keeping that in mind, talk a little bit about sports. Okay, let's talk about sports. Everybody, likes to talk about sport, the pressure testing and things like that. But keep in mind that sport is different from self-defense in many ways. And now I know this is going to be a statement that causes a lot of controversy and argument among martial artists, but it needs to be said. Because while you may be successful in a sports fighting event, okay, that doesn't mean you're going to be successful in the streets. Okay, while it does not hurt, okay, to compete and to, work out and test yourself against trained fighters, it's important to note that there's some very real fundamental differences between sport and reality. Okay, some believe that the ring is a great place to pressure test your techniques against a trained fighter. And while that may be a true statement to some extent, I'd argue that sports martial arts, in contrast, is limited to two people, regulated by a referee in a controlled environment. There are no weapons, there are no rules, and both parties know exactly when the fight's going to start, and they know when it's going to end. Okay? And there's a time limit, not to mention that referee, right? Who's going to stop things when things get out of control. In a street fight, okay, as stated earlier, you may be surprised because you're ambushed. You may likely get hit 5 or 6 times before you even realize what's happening. And there may be multiple attackers. There might be weapons in play. You might be drunk or under the influence. One or all of the attackers might be cops or a friend or a family member that you trusted. There are no rules, and there's no one to break it up once someone gets hurt and things get out of control. Now, I will concede that if you want to test your martial arts ability against other martial artists, then yes, it's a good pressure test of those skills. And it's a good way to gain validation in your own mind. Okay. But that has nothing to do with the real world. Okay. And the thousands of variables that are outside of your control, in addition to the violence that actually comes your way. So this would also be a good point to mention the label combat sports or the combat martial arts label that some add to their schools as a method of marketing. Okay? Combat, however, in its true sense, is not a sport. Perhaps this is a difficult concept for some to understand. But for those who have not experienced combat in its true sense, where the fight is truly about survival, kill or be killed, or a binary choice about life and death, the military mindset is also something that comes into play in true combat. Okay, it's something that must be learned, or maybe that's the wrong word, experienced. Martial arts schools spend a lot of time talking about and practicing techniques or mechanical movements that are involved in practicing a particular style of martial art, okay, but fail to develop the mental mindset that one must take when in an extreme combat situation where you must be prepared to really do harm to another human being or even take a life, at the same time getting your own ass beat. Okay, so there's a lot more to it. I would hesitate to call sport martial arts violence. Okay, that's not somebody who's actually trying to do you real harm or trying to take your life. So we talked a lot about techniques. We talked about grab counters, punch counters, knife attacks, etc. Okay, but we failed to address the simplest offenses like noticing what's going on around you, seeing the dangers that lurk in the dark, and avoiding them altogether. Okay, what about de-escalation techniques? Or talking about what it might, might be better to just comply. How do we make that decision? And how much is your life worth? Can we avoid the conflict altogether? And what tools does martial arts provide to do just that? Okay. There's a lot more to it. Obviously, we cannot always avoid the conflict, so we always train for the worst. Okay. Just don't lose sight of the fact that we don't always have to fight. Okay. You better not be wrong when you make the decision. Okay, whether you make that choice to fight or not. Okay. And you might want to consider those red lines now and make sure that you're prepared either way. So there's a lot more to this situation. With that said, I appreciate you taking the time to listen. I'm sure we'll talk some more about this in detail. And I appreciate you, like I said, taking the time to listen to what I've got to say. If you'd like to leave me some comments, I'd appreciate that because it'll help me to learn. It'll help me to maybe revise some of what I've said or maybe add to it. This is a learning experience for you and for me. I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert at everything. I'm always willing to learn. So please leave me a comment. If you like what the content that I'm putting out, then take a moment, consider subscribing to my channel so you won't miss the next thing that comes out. Look forward to the next video, and we'll talk to you soon.